I invite you to be opening your Bibles to Genesis chapter 18 as we begin. We'll be looking this afternoon at how our homes can help the church by practicing godly discipline. And I think what you just saw on display is the result. Tanner came to me before we started this hour and he said, "Mr. Gage, is there a song you would like led?" And my first thought was, God, give us Christian homes. And so I told him that. And he said, I asked him, I said, "Have you ever led that?" And he said, "No, sir." That did not stop him. He went over, began practicing, came over, sat by me. We practiced together and got up and led it beautifully, may I say. That's the blessing of practicing discipline in a godly home and how it impacts the Lord's church. His younger brother led one of the most beautiful prayers you'll ever hear. That is the result of practicing godly discipline in the home. You think about Abraham, and God, as he is preparing to bring down fire and brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah and is deciding whether or not he is going to do it, he asked a question about whether he should or not. And then he says this about Abraham. He says, "I know him," Genesis 18, verse 19, "that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment." As we begin this afternoon, I want you to ask yourself this question. Can I say, I will raise my children like this? I was once accused of being arrogant. It was not the first time. I'm sure it will not be the last time, because I once said, I will get my children to heaven. Brethren, if you have any other ambition, you are off track. It is our only job as parents to get our children to heaven. You have no other job. You have no other goal. It is not to help them become famous sports figures, actors, politicians. While those all might be worthy goals during this life, they pale in comparison to our duty of getting our children to heaven. And I hope you are confident that by utilizing the tools that God gives you, we're going to discuss those this hour, within His Word, that you can do that. If God tells us to do it, will He not also provide a way and the equipment to do so? And I believe the Bible makes that clear on how to do it. And through the wisdom of God, the home is to be the first place where God's truth is taught. And discipline is one of His primary tools for shaping the hearts and the lives of our children. The godly home is the foundation for a strong church. And yet many families today have drifted from biblical principles of child rearing, embracing lenient and inconsistent methods that fail to reflect God's wisdom. It's weakened the home, and brethren, it's weakened the church. It's led to a generation unprepared in many places to live faithfully in a very challenging and ungodly world. I believe there is truly a crisis in modern parenting today. I believe it exists in the world, and I believe it exists in the church. I have the privilege of traveling to a different congregation and speaking almost every Sunday. And in my travels, I see a plethora of different child-rearing methodologies and paradigms, some of which I will talk about this hour. I believe culture has influenced the church more than the church has influenced culture when it comes to child-rearing. You think about the influences of individuals like Dr. Benjamin Spock, who in 1946 published a book we're going to talk about here for a second. It has influenced the church and people in the church His philosophies are the most widely encouraged parenting philosophies in the United States and surrounding the world today. He teaches an approach that focuses on personal freedom rather than spiritual accountability and self-discipline, which results in confusion and chaos. He says this in his book, page 173. He says, physical punishment certainly plays a role in our acceptance of violence. If we were ever to turn toward a kindlier society and a safer world, a revulsion against physical punishment of children would be a good place to start, I quote. Page 173, he says, my other reasons for advising against physical punishment are, in brief, that it teaches children that might makes right. It encourages some children to be bullies. And most fundamentally, that to the degree that it results in good behavior, it's because of the fear of pain. I want to have a strong belief that the best reason for behaving well is that you like people and that you want to get along with them and that, you want them to like you too. Isn't that cute? He says in page 215, I don't think physical punishment is necessary or even particularly effective, which is in the face of what he had just said, that it actually is effective because the pain causes children to stop. He says this in page 33, all schools should be friendlier, creative places like the best I've seen. We should wean ourselves away from physical punishment. Pages 229 through 233, he says, recently I visited a small private school with the idea of asking children, remember that, what advice to parents they'd like me to incorporate in the forthcoming revision of his book, Baby and Child Care. He asked children what they'd like him to recommend to parents. In a thoughtful mood, the class was unanimous that parents should not hit their children. Duh. If you asked me when I was 12 years old if my dad should whoop me, I'd say no. One child added that if you're crying and your parent tells you to stop and then hits you when you don't stop, it only makes you cry more. I remember my dad one time said, would you like to have a reason right now to cry? Asking children how they should be disciplined. Why not interview parents of adult children who are now upstanding Christian citizens and ask them how they raise their children instead? Maybe that's wisdom. He says this, page 13, I hope American parents can outgrow the conviction that physical punishment is necessary to bring up well-behaved children. There are parts of the world where it has never occurred to any adult to strike a child. I've been to 43 countries in this world. I've yet to see this. I have personally and professionally seen dozens of families in which parents never lifted a hand or otherwise punished or humiliated their children, and yet the children were ideally cooperative and polite. Children are eager to be ever more grown up and responsible. A blind squirrel, I guess, finds a nut every once in a while. He says this, there are several reasons to avoid physical punishment. It teaches children that the larger, the stronger person has the power to get away or to get his way, whether or not he is in the right. Some spank children, then feel quite justified in beating up on smaller ones. The American tradition of spanking may be one reason there is much more violence in our country than any comparable nation. May I say, Dr. Spock was wrong. In contrast, God's Word offers a clear, timeless standard for raising good, godly, compassionate, may I even say, not violent, but compassionate, loving, truthful children. And I believe it's by returning to the principles of God's Word that Christian parents can then transform their homes, which is then going to transform our churches. It's going to strengthen the church and raise up a generation equipped to worship, equipped to lead, and equipped to serve. So in this lesson this hour, I hope to equip us with a biblical foundation. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to offer some practical steps needed to practice godly discipline in our homes. Now, listen, I don't fully expect you to go along with everything I say this hour. There are going to be some of you that are going to disagree. Maybe you've done it differently in the practical aspects. And that's okay. You're welcome to be wrong. I'm going to offer some advice that was gleaned from godly parents. And I'm gonna start with this. My wife and I found out we were going to be having our first child when we were in preaching school, and I walked around like a zombie for several weeks, terrified that I was going to be a father. And one of the reasons was because where we sat at worship, sat in the back corner, and there was another family there that had some young children, and, well, they could have made movies named Chucky after them. And it looked like a Cheeto bomb had exploded in the pews. There was fecal matter. There were bodily fluids. There was food, other things that I don't know what they were. And I was terrified. I don't want children. If they look like this, I don't want those things. And I was terrified, I'll be honest. And finally, a sweet lady, if I told you her name, you'd know her. Most of you, at least. She cornered me. She said these words, "It doesn't have to be like that." My brethren, I hope through some practical teaching, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but hopefully this reaches farther than that. Maybe we can direct our ships to head into safe harbors through God's Word. Let me give you some guidelines. Let's start with that. Guidelines for godly discipline. Godly discipline first has to be consistent. If you want to be a good parent and discipline properly, it has to be consistent. Don't spank one day when they do something wrong and then wait 6 months and go, I don't know why they're acting like this. And all of a sudden we're going to do it again. And then it has to be consistent because our Father's consistent. God, our Father, is consistent, is He not? You think about Romans chapter 2, that you think about it, it says, for with God there is no respect of persons. Why? Because our God is consistent. Why is it that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever? Well, because He is consistent. In teaching about this very concept in Hebrews chapter 12, it tells us that our Father, who chastened many times, He's going to chasten us. Why? And we should follow that example, right? We should follow His example. If He is always consistent, will God always punish those that are evil? Absolutely. Will He always reward those that are righteous? Absolutely. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6, God is a rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. Think about 2 Thessalonians, where it talks about how God is going to bring flaming vengeance on them that obey not God, not His gospel. See, our God is a God of consistency. And if we're to mimic Him in our parenting, in our discipline, we should be consistent too. I was disciplining my child one time, and a sweet, well-meaning, a lot of well-meaning people, well-meaning lady came to me, and she said, you don't always have to be like that. Wrong. If it's wrong, it's always wrong in my house. And we're always going to discipline for it in my house because it's always wrong. Therefore, it always deserves the discipline. Now, the discipline may take different forms, but I'm going to be consistent in disciplining the wrong. So we have to be focused on consistent discipline. And let me add this, by both parents. Parents, listen, it is not just when your dad gets home. That works. Listen, my parents did that. I can remember hearing the words, when your dad gets home, and I thought, I am dead meat. But my mama whooped me just as much or more, with more things. And my dad had a belt. And the belt sound still resonates, pop, 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 as it came through the belt loops. But my mom was a what's ever close by kind of whooper. If there was a hanger, if there was a sandal, whatever. But they were both consistent in it. Parents, listen, we have to be consistent. Children are manipulators. They're little manipulators. And they're going to try. And so if they can get one of the parents to be okay with it and the other one to not be okay with it, they're going to do that. They're going to find your weak spot and they're going to get in there. And so you have to be We called it at our house the United Front. We're the United Front. If one of us was going to get on them, both of us were going to get on them. If one of us was frustrated about it, we were both frustrated about it. Why? Because consistency works. Godly discipline requires consistency. It also must be consequential. It has to be enough that it helps the child never to want to do it again, regardless of what Dr. Spock says. Now, I want you to think about this in relationship to what we often see today. At the store the other day, we were traveling and we were coming through Alabama, and there was and it has nothing to do with Alabama, maybe it does, I don't know. But there's this woman and her child, and the child was maybe 5, and it was stomping its feet and throwing a fit in this convenience store, and the mother couldn't control it, and the father came over and he said, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and the child's over there on the ground now having a come apart. Nothing's happening. That's not consequential, brethren. Counting is not discipline. If you're a counter, please hear me, stop. Don't count to your children. All you've told them is that you have time to be done. Don't. If they're not doing what they're supposed to, immediately go over, pick them up, whoop their tail, set them back down, and give them opportunity to behave again. And if they don't want to choose to behave again, make it consequentially more until the point that they choose to obey. Now, some say, well, that's me. No. Well, my child, he just doesn't respond to, you're not doing it enough yet. Listen, I know. It sounds harsh in 2025, but it works. There is not a child out there that does not feel pain. I've had so many parents, my child just doesn't feel pain. My brother, he swore he didn't feel pain. We figured out why. My dad went to spank him one day, and he whooped him, and a little patch of white came out of his britches. My dad got to looking, and he had went to the bathroom and stuffed his britches full of toilet paper. We figured out real quick why he wasn't feeling pain, and he got bare-reared. And it worked. Brethren, it has to be consequential enough to cause them to not want to do it. See, it only works when the bad behavior is treated in such a way it forces the child to never want to do that action again. This is the purpose of the rod that you read about in your Bible. It's an instrument of discipline. It's not a weapon of frustration. It's not a weapon of frustration. It's a tool used to carry out discipline by the parent. It could be a switch cut from a peach tree, which seemed to be something I often earned. A wooden spoon. A board specifically designed to carry out the discipline, but it should induce pain but not damage. The goal is to reach the brain through the nerve endings of the back side of the child, or maybe it could come in a different form. I can remember my taste buds getting affected one time because I said a word as I entered into my grandmother's house, and the screen door slammed on my hand, and I said a word that I've been used to saying at school, but not at home. My grandma got a hold of me. I thought she was going to whoop me. She dragged me into the bathroom, and she put a bar of soap in my mouth. And to this day, I hear a bad word, and I can taste dial. It worked. Maybe the rod can come in the form of withholding something from the child that child dearly loves or enjoys, and it reaches the brain of the child that says, I don't want to miss that anymore, and so I'm not going to do that behavior anymore. But the goal is to change the behavior through the consequences. And it must be understood that not all children are the same. Some children require much more physical discipline, while some could simply respond to firm words from a loving parent. I had 2 completely different children. My daughter, I could just look at her and she would melt. My son, my wife, I counted as I was preaching in Buena, Texas, one Sunday morning, carried him out 23 times and whooped his tail right outside. And he came back in and looked like this. And it took a little more. They're different. Whatever the form of discipline, though, it needs to be understood that the actions of the child should be changed radically by the disciplinary actions of the parent. Discipline should bring about the response from the child, not of fear, of dread. I never want that again. Godly discipline. It has to also be controlled. Discipline should never be done in a moment of anger, a moment of rage. And I know sometimes we're frustrated. The children need to know that a parent that disciplines them is only ever disciplining them in the goal and in the sight of helping them, of loving them into an eternity in heaven. That's the goal. That's the goal. They don't need to see us lash out in anger. And listen, we make mistakes. Listen, sometimes you might lash out in anger, parents. This is your moment to show true godliness and apologize to your child. That might be hard. Oh, I'm the parent. No, you're a Christian. Apologize. Say, I was wrong. I made a mistake. Discipline carried out in a fit of rage teaches a child to resent their parents, resent the church, the beliefs of their parents. And it only damages the church and should be guarded against at all cost. The Bible clearly teaches us fathers to bring up our children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Nurture. Fathers, we're to be also nurturing. Mercy and compassion, then show that. So you want to be a parent who disciplines godly, also do it with compassion. We must also show them compassion in the most difficult of times. He says in Proverbs 13 and verse 24, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. This compassion should show through to our children. I love you. Hold them afterwards. Cuddle them afterwards. Tell them why you discipline them. Explain that to them. I can remember this working so effectively on our daughter that she had a baby doll when she was little that was called Baby Blue Eyes. And Baby Blue Eyes went everywhere with Roya. I mean, everywhere. And she loved Baby Blue Eyes. Baby Blue Eyes one day was in the back seat, and I don't know what Baby Blue Eyes did, but she really did it. And I hear these words from the back seat. No, no, Baby Blue Eyes. My wife and I kind of looked at each other. No, no, Baby Blue Eyes. It grew louder. No, no. Whack, whack, whack. We looked in the back seat. And then I saw the greatest thing. She grabbed Baby Blue Eyes and said, I love you, Baby Blue Eyes. I just don't want you to be bad. Do our children see that in us? That we love them too? That we have compassion for them? See, there's times to be firm and stern, but then there's times to have our hearts moved to compassion and mercy with our children. See, balance in discipline is crucial to success as a godly parent. So we need to be compassionate. We also need to be catered. Each child, I'm going to say it again. I've said it before. We're going to say it again. Each child's different. Some are tough and some are tender. And so our discipline should match both the action and the actor. I'm not going to discipline my daughter that's tender the same with my tough son. Why? Because they're different. And so I need to understand that. So I hope those are kind of some basics to help us. I want us to look for a second at the consequences, though, of a lack of godly discipline. Now, I had some fun with AI and found, I typed in, I wanted a church full of undisciplined children, and this is what it gave me. I thought it was awesome. I've been at this place, I'm sure, somewhere. But a lack of discipline at home, it leads to so many problems in the church. Unchecked disruptions. You ever sat in worship when there were just a child left to themselves, as the Bible would say? And the disruptions that they have caused. My mother one time was very sick and she could not be at worship with us. And my dad was song leading. And so us three boys, which were very ornery, were sitting by ourselves. And my middle brother, the one that stuffed his britches, he's bad. He brought a ball of rubber bands to church. And Mary March sat on the second pew. And Mary March was about 85, about 5 foot tall, and cute and sweet as could be. And my brothers and I were sitting about where my son is. And I look over, and my brother has got his rubber band, and he pulls it back, and he shoots Mary March right in the back of the head. And we're all back there. My dad came down out of the dais and whooped my brother. It was awesome for me. But it had the whole place disrupted. The whole place was disrupted. And then, bless her heart, Mary March turned around and found that rubber band and shot my brother back. But there are so many disruptions in church, we don't need our children. Now listen, there are normal disruptions from children. Our children are going to cry. Our children are going to have moments. That's natural, brethren. But we don't need it to be because we're not doing our job at home. The Bible clearly teaches that all things in worship are to be done decently and in order. And I believe truly the way our children behave falls under that concept. That the undisciplined children, they distract and they disrupt others' ability to focus and participate properly during worship. And I'm just going to give this out. This is like one of those timeout moments, right? Timeout. Children's worship. People say, well, my kids can't behave in worship, so we need to have children's worship. That's your fault, not the church's. Let's continue just worshiping together. Teach your children at home. We're going to talk about that in a minute, how to do this. But I have seen, untimeout, I have personally seen undisciplined children literally leave the pew stained with food and drinks and everything else. I've seen children throw paper airplanes across worship during worship. I mean, just some children have been allowed to make loud vocalizations, crawl over pews, under pews, through pews, tear apart song books, write on everything that the church has there. My late grandmother, Dorothy Jean Coldwater, taught my wife and I a valuable lesson about child rearing when we started having children. She said, if a child can learn to do something, they can also learn to not do something. So let me give you some practical advice on preparing your children for worship and Bible class assemblies. Now, this is probably where you're going to fall off the wagon with me, so hold on. Practice worship at home. Practice worship. You got little children, they're struggling to sit there, but they can sit through a movie at the movie theater. Maybe we need to train them at home how to sit through worship. How do we do that? Let me give you some suggestions. This worked for us. It was none of this is original by me. Begin by setting your child at home in a room, quiet, no TV, no radio, no distractions. 5 minutes. Explain to them, we're going to practice for worship today. We're going to sing some songs. We're going to say some prayers. We're going to read the Bible. We're going to do it, and we're not going to wiggle. We're not going to squirm. We're not going to need toys or candy or food. We're just going to behave. And then we're going to sit here for a little bit just quietly. That's hard for a little one. It's hard. And they start to wiggle and you say, hey, remember what we're doing. We're practicing for worship. Remember, what's worship to us? What is worship to you? As a parent, what is worship to you? Is it not the greatest moment of your week? To me, it's the greatest moment of my week. I want my children to know that. I want my children to know that worship, I was at worship the other night and I'm hurting because I've got some back pain right now. And this sweet, well-meaning lady came up to me. She said, why aren't you at home? I said, well, I'm going to hurt. I could hurt at home or I could hurt at worship. I want to be at worship. We should teach our children that mentality. I want to be there. And I want it to be a great experience for everyone involved. And so this starts at home. So teach them that, hey, we're preparing for the greatest thing that's going to happen this week, worship. Make it the greatest thing to them. Teach them to go use the bathroom before you start this. Go use the bathroom before. Go get a drink before. You're not getting a drink once we start. Go Go get it before. Okay? These are simple things. We're going to teach them. We're going to be very quiet. This is a time of quietness and peacefulness and reflectiveness. Then as they grow a little older, we start lengthening the time. We're going to sit here for 20 minutes and do this, and then 30 minutes, and then they can sit through one of Tom Moore's sermons. It'd be awesome. Conduct a practice worship regularly. Don't expect too much when they're little. Give them some grace and some compassion. My time is up. Oh, okay. I thought you looked at your clock. Well, don't be looking at that clock. I'm watching you for that clock. I'm going to throw this your way too. Feed them beforehand. I'm not talking about babies that are nursing or on a bottle. But you've got children that are not nursing or on the Bible. Teach them to eat beforehand. Feed them a good meal before you go to worship so that they're not hungry and whining. I need food. You don't need to have a Cheeto bomb in your pew. Feed them beforehand so that they're not hungry. They're not demanding during worship. My wife and I, we chose not to allow our children, you may not agree with me here, it's fine. But we chose to not allow our children to draw, doodle, color, play with toys during worship. Let me explain why, please. Worship is as I said earlier, a very holy and reverent time to our family. It's a special time. And because of that, it receives special time from me. Special attention and special treatment from me. It's different than any other time in our lives. It's worship. So we didn't want to start something. Now this applies to a lot of things we might consider that we didn't want to have to stop. If you start it, you have to stop it at some point. You don't have to stop it if you don't start it. It might apply to modesty, by the way, moms. For our kids. If you don't put them in booty shorts when they're little, you don't have to stop them when they're bigger. So we didn't do those things. We just went to worship. We had a Bible. They had a notepad. When they couldn't write, when they didn't know their letters, we had them draw a picture. And I said, well, that's what you said not to do. No, we had them draw a picture about the lesson to the best of their ability. That was okay. We had a children's Bible that they would carry with them. We wanted them to try to follow along. Here's what we did do, though. That was what we didn't do. Here's what we did do. We gave them a pen and a pad to try. We tried to feed them beforehand a hearty, nutritious meal to prevent them from being hungry. We would take them purposefully between services. Our job was to take them to the bathroom. Go. I don't need to go. Go. I don't want to go. You're going. I'm not thirsty. Get a drink. But I don't want to drink. Drink. You're the parent. Okay. You can tell them. They would get their drink and we would go. This wasn't playtime in between Bible class and worship. This wasn't playtime to run around and act like a hooligan. This was time to get ready for worship. So we were getting ready for worship. Serious, right? This is serious. If I take it serious as a parent, my kid will take it serious. So we would take them and then we would go in and we'd get our pew and we would get there and we positioned ourselves. Like we're strategic when it comes to worship with little kids. I am not going to sit behind another family with a bunch of kids that are rambunctious and crazy. Why? Because my kids are going to be like, what are they doing up there? Why can't I have? No. So we positioned ourselves, which often meant we were right here. Because then you don't see anything but the preacher, the song leader, prayers, Lord's Supper. Worked great. We also didn't position ourselves next to the sweet, well-meaning, sweet little old lady that brought this big of a bag of toys, candy, food, and other paraphernalia that was off limits to my family. We didn't sit near her. This lady sat behind us one day, unbeknownst to us, and she started handing toys over the pew. Like, what are you doing? Stop, no! Don't do that! We've been working on, no! Like, we're like passing toys. Stop it. You know what's happening the whole time? Disruption of worship. That shouldn't happen with us. We did not also allow them to have candy at worship, regardless of who gave it to them. We didn't. Trigger warning right here. Trigger warning. You might be the candy lady, the candy man. Sorry. Also, I didn't take, when somebody would give my child candy, 5 minutes, I didn't take the candy and eat it. We'd take it and we'd give it to them at home. But we didn't let them have it. You know why? Because I didn't want that dumb sucker stick stuck to me. Stuck to somebody else, stuck to the pew, stuck to the floor. Didn't want it. I didn't want my kids sugared up, hopped up on candy. I believed that their good behavior was more important than the candy. So we just didn't do that. We would gently request from Bible class teachers to refrain from giving our children candy as a reward. Gently. We didn't want them to have those deals, so we just didn't do it. So now some viewed us, and you might think, man, Gage is crazy. That's fine. I've heard it. Some viewed us as way too strict for these rules. But I believe that the results have spoken for themselves. Our children loved attending worship when they were little. I mean, they loved it. They couldn't wait to get to worship. We would listen, and I'm going to throw this freebie right here. Get there early. Get to worship early. Parents, listen to me. Hopefully my parents aren't listening. My parents were perennially late to worship. There's nothing more embarrassing to a child than being late. You don't even want to walk in there when you're late because everybody goes and looks at you. Don't do that to your kid. Get them there. Get them there on time. Get them there full. Get them there prepared. Have their Bible classes ready. Have everything ready for them to succeed at worship. That's your job. We don't need unchecked disruptions. Don't be the cause of it. Then there are, problems of others are prevented. You think about the consequences. Others are prevented from growing and learning. I mean, I think this is self-explanatory. Children that go into Bible class that are undisciplined, they're going to annoy everybody to death. There was a kid at this place we went, he'd bring in food, like a full sandwich to Bible class. And all the other kids are like, I'm hungry. Can I have a sandwich? And that shouldn't be the case. They need to be prepared. So don't prevent others from growing and learning. You think about the consequences. You think about the damage that occurs to the property of the Lord's church. That shouldn't be on you, parents. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't allow that. Don't let them tear up Bibles and the song books and the pews and the walls and everything else. Don't let them do that. We have to protect the Lord's things. And so we don't want us to be the cause of that destruction. But what about this one? The church's reputation. Think about Eli. I don't have time. You go to 1 Samuel chapter 2. You think about the reputation of God's people because of Eli not disciplining his sons. He brought a reproach upon the Lord's people. What about the blessings? Let's end with this. The blessings of having well-disciplined children in church. I love this picture. This is my favorite picture. It's an AI picture. He might have 3 eyes. I don't know. But I taught my son when he was little, I want you to walk up to every man in church and I want you to shake their hands. We taught him how to shake the hand firmly. I want you to look them in the eye and I want you to ask them how they're doing. I hate asking a kid. You shake their hand and they're like, how are you? I'm fine. And they walk off like they've got a mental disability. No, teach your kid. Have a conversation with that older man. How are you, sir? Respect. What a great lesson, by the way. Teach them that respect. Have that there. You want the blessings, then respect abounds. When you discipline at home, it's going to show forth in the Lord's church. And it's going to make older people, do you not love it when a younger person talks to you? Wisdom. Think about the wisdom that's then allowed to flow. See, these children are raised in an environment of consistent compassion and discipline. They're naturally going to have this reverence for God. And then, Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. Wisdom is going to start flowing when they have this. Disciplined children often ask thoughtful questions, enriching Bible classes, encouraging others to act well. Wisdom. Then you think about this, worship. When you have well-disciplined children, worship is decently and orderly. It's a beautiful thing. And then the last thing I want to say is that you've created an environment now for the future leaders of the Lord's church to grow. You have prepared, you have cultivated a place for them to now flourish without the weeds of this world distracting them from the greatest thing in their lives, the Lord's church. In Hebrews chapter 11, or chapter 12 and verse 11, it says this, "Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterwards, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." That's my dream for my children, is that they're going to someday, they don't like it now. I didn't like it then either. But that someday in their lives, they're going to yield fruit of righteousness. And that's going to shape the Lord's church in ways that we could never dream, brethren. Let's bring up our children in the nurture, admonition of the Lord so that they can impact the Lord's church for great things someday.